The Veteran's Voice, Stories That Deserve to Be Heard, is proudly sponsored by Calling Gilbert Wright and Carter.
My name is Daniel Keel. My rank was flight officer during World War II, and the branch I was in was the United States Army Air Force. And this is my story. Well, after I became a navigator, we were told that the planes that the Negroes were flying up at Godman Field were medium bombers. And the medium bombers required that the navigator be a bombardier. And that we were being sent to Midland Army Air Base to train to become bombardiers. Right after we got off the train at Midland Army Air Base, an Army officer walked up to us and told us that he was Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, and that he, Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, was the deputy commander of Midland Army Air Base, and that he, Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, was born in Texas, he was raised in Texas, and he expected to die in Texas. And if we Negroes didn't know our place while we were in his state of Texas, he spelled it out for us. 1, we could not eat in the officers' mess. 2, we could not go in the officers' club. 3, if we go to the movies, we could not sit in the officers' section. And 4, if we go to town, we had to ride the back of the bus. 12 o'clock sharp, we arrived at the cadet mess hall to eat our noonday meal. Meals back in those days were called breakfast, dinner, and supper. 12:05, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40, no food. But we noticed that every time a group of white cadets came in and sat down, they were promptly fed. After the last group had been fed, the mess sergeant and his crew started bringing us officers what was left of the food. By this time, we were so angry that we told the mess sergeant and the crew to take the food they were bringing us and shove it. Walked over to the officers' mess and demanded that we be fed. Next morning, after breakfast, Phelps and his crew came over to our quarters, demanding to know why we had disobeyed his orders by not eating in the cadet mess hall. We told the lieutenant colonel what had taken place, and he told us that excuse wasn't good enough for him, and for disobeying his orders, we're going to have each and every one of us court-martialed. One of my classmates, Lieutenant Savoy, who had spent a year at the Pentagon in D.C., said to us, if we're going to be court-martialed, let's not be court-martialed by a lieutenant colonel. Let's be court-martialed by a general. And of course, we all said, what difference does it make, court-martial or being a court-martial? He said, it just looked better on our record saying we're court-martialed by a general than a lieutenant colonel. We said, okay, in that case, write us a letter. 2 or 3 hours later, a letter was brought over to my quarters. After reading the letter, I said, have my other classmates seen the letter? He said, I was the last one to see the letter because my quarters happened to be the last one in the barracks. I said, did they approve the letter? The answer was yes. I said, if they have read and approved the letter, why aren't there any signatures on the letter? And the answer was, although each one of my classmates who had read and approved the letter didn't want to be the first to sign it, because they figured he who signed it first would be considered a ringleader. Well, I said, I be damned. I said, that just leaves me. So I was the first one to sign the letter. Afterwards, most but not all my classmates co-signed the letter. Later that afternoon, we sent the letter airmail special delivery to the Southwest Commanding General and placed a copy on the base commander's desk. 2 or 3 days later, a couple of white officers came over our quarters and told us the general was on the base, ordered every white officer on the base to meet with him at the base theater to discuss our situation. And that's where they were going. And after the meeting was over, they would give us a report. About an hour or so later, the same 2 men came back and gave us a report. After all the white officers had assembled in the theater, the general threw out the question, how should we Negro officers be treated while we were on the base? And we were told that the discussion became so heated that a fist fight broke out among some of the white officers in the theater. And the only way the general was able to quell the melee by having the national anthem played. After order was restored in the theater, the general told the officers in the theater, though we were Negroes, we were officers in the United States Army Air Force, and being officers in the United States Air Force, we will be treated with the same respect, privileges, dignity, promotions of any other officer on the base, period. Walked off the podium, followed by the base commander. No sooner had the door closed on the two men when Phelps told the officers in the theater before dismissing them he would get even those Negro officers as the last thing he ever did. 2 weeks later, temperature on the base was running around 100 degrees in the shade, and the humidity was sky high. Phelps ordered our quarters and our quarters only to have a gas mask drill. Now, a gas mask drill back in those days, one had to wear a full-face gas mask for 4 hours. And to make sure we received the full benefit of it, he made sure that we wore it between 1 and 5, the hottest part of the day, confined to our barracks. Now, my quarters, I said before, was the last one in the barracks. So I had 2 exposed walls, and with 2 exposed walls, I had 2 windows. So hopefully, if a breeze did come up, it would go through one window and out the other. So my classmate, Lieutenant Burke, and I invited 4 of our closest classmates to spend a miserable afternoon in our quarters. After they arrived in our quarters, I locked the door. 3.5 hours later, we heard doors being opened and closed. Now, we knew that could only be Phelps and his crew checking up on us to see how miserable we were. Of course, when he got to my door and tried to open it, he couldn't. It was locked. I heard a knock on the door. I asked, "Who is it?" No answer. Then I heard another knock on the door. This time I yelled out a little louder, "Who is it?" Still no knock. The third time he knocked on the door, one of my classmates said, "Damn it to hell. If you can't tell us who you are, I suggest, using a good word, that you urinate on the floor, slide on the door in your urine, and please, while doing so, sing the Negro National Anthem." I heard a voice outside the door say, "Lieutenant Colonel Phelps." I opened the door and looked in the face of a red-faced colonel and said, "I'm sorry, sir. I did not know it was you. I thought it was one of our classmates trying to play a trick on us." The colonel said, "I see you 6 men are not wearing your gas mask. We're going to have each and one of you court-martialed." One of my classmates said, "Lieutenant Colonel, sir, Army regulation states that the drill you're putting us through now shall be carried out only once every 6 months. Now, if you check our records, you'll see just before we left Hondo, we had this drill. So therefore, we are not required to have it again for at least another 5 months." That ended that court-martial attempt. 2 weeks before graduation, a couple of white officers came over our quarters and told us Phelps was doing everything in his power to have us sent to some godforsaken island in the Pacific. But as far as they were concerned, Phelps was wasting his time. Because as far as they're concerned, there was no way in hell, they said, but the Army going to let a black navigator tell a white pilot where to go. 2 weeks later, found us at Godman Field, where the Negro pilots were in transitional training. Now, the reason why there were no twin-engine pilots, Negro twin-engine pilots, in the war zone at that time, because the commanding officer at Godman Field was a racist, and his immediate boss was a racist. Now, the reason why we believe we made it through Midland without any casualties, because Midland Army Air Base was not only a training center, it was an R&R base for returned combat bombardiers. And those returned combat bombardiers, knowing what the Red Tails had done for them while they were in combat, made it impossible for Phelps to coerce them, intimidate them, or bribe them in any sort of way to have some of us thrown out of pilot training. Right after we arrived at Godman Field, the Army realized they didn't have enough pilots to accommodate all us navigators. So, me and my classmates were sent back to Tuskegee to train to become pilots. When we arrived back at Tuskegee to train to become pilots, there were 27 of us in our group. When graduation rolled around, there was only 3 of us left, Phelps. I now believe when the 27 of us were sent back for pilot training, not a single one of us was supposed to make it all the way through. You see, the second week on the base, when we walked in our AI-NI class, we saw 10 X's on the blackboard. When our instructor walked in and said, "Good morning," he said, "You see those 10 X's on the board?" We said, "Yep." Come Friday, 10 of you men will no longer be in this class. Needless to say, we were stunned by his remarks. And then we all said, almost in unison, Lieutenant Colonel Phelps. That rascal tentacles had followed us all the way over to Tuskegee Army Air Base. Come Friday, 10 of us were thrown out of pilot training. Now, the reason why we believe Phelps had a hand in it, because the 10 of us that was thrown out of pilot training just happened to be the first 10 signatures on the letter we sent the Southwestern Commanding General. And wherein I was the first one to sign the letter, I was the first one thrown out of pilot training. Well, this time we wrote and sent a letter to the Southeastern Commanding General. 2 or 3 days later, he was on the base. After our meeting with him, the 10 of us that was thrown out of pilot training was placed back into the program, and the instructor was fired. While this was going on, though, I was surprised to see at the end of lower primary, half the men in my group was told they couldn't solo the airplane, and the required amount of time were promptly sent back to Godman Field. At the end of upper primary, 2/3 of the men in my group had been thrown out of pilot training and sent back to Godman Field. Now, just before we entered basic flight training, we were told 2 things. One, all training done in basic and advanced was done by Army personnel, and some of the instructors were not very friendly. As a matter of fact, we had one instructor who was proud of his record of never ever passing anyone from basic to advanced or advanced to graduation. And wherein each instructor was given 3 men to train in basic and 3 men to train in advanced, 6 men in every class at least were not going to make it. The second thing we were told, that the planes that everyone before us had trained in were no longer going to be used for training purposes. The planes that we would have to learn how to fly in basic training was the planes that everyone before us had learned how to fly in advance. Now, just before we entered basic flight training, the Army brass made a return red-tailed black 99th captain an instructor, and I and 2 of my classmates were his first pupil. At the end of basic flight training, you guessed it, we were the only 3 left in my group. Again, Phelps. Right after we finished basic flight training, my instructor told Lindsay and Williams, the 2 remaining in my group, they were going to train to be twin-engine pilots. I was going to be trained to be a fighter pilot. Just as my instructor finished telling me I was going to be trained to be a fighter pilot, I knew with Phelps on my back, my chance of earning my pilot wings ran already between slim to none. And I told my instructor so. And my instructor told me he didn't make the assignments, he just carried them out. I told my instructor that may be true, but I would appreciate it very much if he would have me transferred from single engine to twin engines. And I gave him my reason for wanting to do so. A couple hours later, my instructor came back and told me my wish had been granted. And to make sure there was no hanky-panky going on in advanced flight training, he made sure the instructor he had trained us was tough, but he was fair. 2.5 weeks before graduation, all I had to do to earn my pilot wings and get a promotion was to pass my cross-country instrument flight check and my AINI tests. The day before I was to take my instrument flight check, I developed a wicked cold. My throat was so raw I couldn't hardly swallow. A couple of my former classmates who were still on the base, because of a mutiny going on among several of the Negro officers up in Freeman Field in Indiana, suggested to me that the quickest way to get rid of that sore throat was to take a good shot of Alabama moonshine. I took a good shot of Alabama moonshine and spent the next 7 days in the hospital. After talking my way out of the hospital on a Wednesday, week and a half before graduation, I went up to my instructor and told him I was ready for my instrument flight check. He told me, sorry, all flight checks for my class have been completed, and I have to wait till the next class comes along to take my instrument flight check. I told him I didn't want to wait till the next class comes along. I wanted to take it now, and I gave him my reason for wanting to do so. Friday afternoon, my instructor comes up to me and said, Dan, You know, Saturdays and Sundays are my day off. I said, yes, sir, I know that. I tell you what he said. The football team here on the base is going to play the Marines down at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, this coming Sunday. Now, he said, if you will fly the team equipment down to Camp Lejeune tomorrow morning, I'll go down, fly down with you as your co-pilot. And on the way back, I'll give you an instrument flight check. I flew a perfect mission down and a perfect mission back. First thing I did after I landed the plane was go over to the administration building to check on my records. My flight record didn't say satisfactory, it said very satisfactory. My academic record wasn't what I thought it should have been, but a 92 was 7 points higher than an 85. Why squawk? Because all I needed to get a promotion was be above an 85. Went over and told my former classmates who were still on the base the good news. One of my former classmates told me, not so fast. I said, what's going down now? There's a rumor going around that Robinette, who's a second lieutenant, failed you in AINI, he will be promoted to a first lieutenant. Phelps is still after you. Monday, after we'd taken the test, my two classmates in my group and I compared notes, and we came to the conclusion, if I fail, they fail. Tuesday, when we got our test marks, they being student officers got theirs first, and their mark was somewhere between 96 and 100. I knew then I defeated Phelps one more time. After all the papers was passed out, I looked up at Robinette and asked him where was my test paper. Robinette with a straight face said he lost my test paper, and by losing my test paper, I would have to take a makeup test. And if I passed the makeup test, the highest mark I could get would be a 70. Now, I will not attempt to repeat to you now what I think I said to Robinette. Went in and took the makeup test. I was so angry, I didn't care what I put down on that piece of paper. But I guess I must have put down the right answers, because he just took one look at my test paper and said, you pass. Your mark would be a 70. Now, the only reason why I believe he passed me, because he knew what had happened to an instructor who had pulled that stunt on us in primary. Now, the AINI test carried the lowest mark value of any of our academic marks. So I factor in the 70 into the 92, I came up with an 89. Friday afternoon, I was told to report to the administration building to sign my records. When I given my flight record, very satisfactory, I signed it. When I was given my academic record, the sheet was blank. I looked at the man behind the desk. I said, this cotton-picking form is blank. You don't expect me to sign a blank piece of paper, do you? The man said, you want your wings this coming Monday morning? Sure, I said. Then my advice to you is you better sign it, because if you don't sign this blank piece of paper, you will not be receiving your wings this coming Monday morning. I wanted my wings, so I signed a blank form, and Monday morning, when I got my pilot wings, you guessed it again, I was denied my promotion. 2 or 3 weeks later, Robinette was given his first lieutenant bars. Finally, I would like to say that in my wildest dreams that I ever think that what we Tuskegee Airmen did and accomplished during World War II will be remembered by so many people several years later. And for your remembrance, I would like to say thank you.